She was already married before she understood what she had lost. No flowers, no feast, no blessings whispered beneath a harvest moon. Just chains, gilded, yes, but chains all the same, and the cold stone floor of the shadow keep pressing into her knees as the most feared alpha in the known realm stood over her like a verdict. Isa of the Goldveil pact had been handed to him like a peace offering, like a lamb delivered to a wolf and dressed in white, so the blood would show prettier. She had not wept when her father signed the accord. She had not screamed when the guards came. She had not begged when the gates of her home closed behind her for the last time. But now, kneeling in the hall of Draven Ashkar, the Shadow Alpha, the Butcher of Duskholm, the man who had raised 3 packs in a single season and left nothing standing but smoke and silence, Isa pressed her teeth together hard enough to taste iron, and she told herself the only lie that had ever kept her alive. She was not afraid. Then he spoke. "Look up," he said. 2 words. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice that does not need to raise itself because the room always goes quiet before it arrives. Isa looked up, and the world, as she had known it, ended. Not because he was terrifying, though he was. Not because his eyes were the color of a storm that had forgotten how to stop, though they were. But because somewhere deep inside her chest, in the part of her that belonged not to reason or pride or survival, something ancient and unbearable cracked open. And it whispered one word, in a voice she had never heard before. Mine. She was his fated mate. The monster was her destiny. And neither of them was ready for what that meant. Chapter 1. The Goldveil pack had been dying for 2 years before anyone admitted it out loud. Their crops failed. Their warriors dwindled. 3 of their border villages had been swallowed by the Shadow Pack's expanding territory without a single blade drawn, because what was the point of drawing a blade against a tide? Alpha Cedric of Goldveil was a proud man in the way that empty men are proud, loudly, desperately, and at the expense of everyone around him. He sat at the head of his crumbling table and pretended he still had options. He did not. Draven Ashkar had sent a single emissary. Not an army. Not a threat. An emissary. Which, frankly, was more insulting. The message was brief. It did not request. It informed. The Shadow Alpha offers terms of absorption, the emissary announced, his tone as flat and efficient as a man reading a grain inventory. Your lands, your wolves, your resources, folded into the Shadow Pack. In exchange, your people are spared. Your Alpha retains an advisory title. He let a beat pass, as if allowing the room to grieve its dignity in private. He also requires a bride, of noble blood, to seal the accord. The table went very, very quiet. Isa stood at the far end of it. She had not been summoned. She had heard the commotion and come herself, because she had always been inconveniently hard to ignore and absolutely impossible to manage, a quality her father had never found charming. She watched his eyes move to her, and she understood, in the space between one breath and the next, exactly how this would end. "My daughter," her father began. "Do not," she said. Her voice was so quiet it almost disappeared. "Do not say it like it was ever a choice you were going to give me." Isa. "I am looking at you." She stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her like she was holding herself together by sheer force of arrangement. "I want you to look at me when you do it. Not at the table. Not at the emissary. At me." Cedric of Goldveil, Alpha of a dying pack, did what proud empty men always do when the cost of their choices has a face. He looked away. "It will be an honorable arrangement," he said, his voice very steady. He had clearly been practicing. "You will be the mate of the most powerful alpha on the continent." "That is not." "He is called the Butcher of Duskholm, father," she cut in. "Titles are political." He leveled an entire pack in a single night, she said, slower this time, as though perhaps the pace was what had allowed him to keep missing it. They refused his terms. So will I, she replied. The silence after that was the loudest thing Isa had ever heard. The emissary studied a point above her head with immense professional disinterest. Cedric's jaw worked. You will go, he said finally, and the words came out thin and worn, like cloth that had been laundered too many times. And you will be gracious. And you will not. He finally looked at her, and there was something broken in it, something she almost felt sorry for. You will not make this harder than it already is. For whom? She asked. He did not answer. He did not have to. That evening, Isa packed one bag. She chose what she would carry carefully, a hunting knife, the kind with a bone handle worn smooth from use. A small jar of salve her mother had made, years before her mother had thought to leave instead of stay. A cloak, gray, not white, because she refused to arrive looking like a sacrifice. And a letter she had begun 3 times and abandoned twice, addressed to no one, saying nothing she knew how to say. She burned the letter. She kept the knife. They rode for 2 days through the Ashen Corridor, the stretch of land between Goldveil and Shadow Pact territory that no one had mapped recently because no one who mapped it had come back with encouraging news. Isa rode in a covered carriage with 2 ladies-in-waiting her father had selected, presumably on the basis of their ability to look pleasant and not ask questions. He had miscalculated on the second count. They say he does not speak in full sentences. Only commands, Lady Surrey announced, with the particular energy of someone who finds other people's doom very interesting. And that his last beta lost 3 fingers simply for delivering bad news. Isa replied. Does that not frighten you? Surrey pressed. Which part? Isa said, tilting her head. The 3 fingers or the incomplete sentences. Because, frankly, the grammar is what I find most troubling. Surrey stared at her. I am joking, Isa added. Mostly. She turned to look out the small window at the landscape darkening around them, and the humor went out of her voice like a candle going out in a wind. If I stop joking, Surrey, I am going to sit here and genuinely consider what I have been given away for, and I am not in the mood for that kind of honesty this close to arriving. They did not speak for the remainder of the journey. When the shadow keep appeared, and appeared was the right word, because it did not so much come into view as materialize, black stone rising out of the mountainside like something the mountain had grown itself, sharp and deliberate and ancient. Isa pressed 2 fingers to the base of her throat and counted her pulse. Steady. Good. She could work with steady. Chapter 2. The Shadow Pack did not celebrate her arrival. They watched it. Hundreds of them lined the inner courtyard, warriors and common wolves alike, their eyes tracking the carriage with an expression Isa could not immediately name. Not hostility, precisely. Not welcome. Something more like assessment. They were measuring her. She supposed she was measuring them too. The carriage door opened. A hand appeared, large, scarred across the knuckles, steady as the stone around them. She looked up into the face of a warrior who had the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal of the world and found the majority of it disappointing. Beta Orin, he announced, flat and efficient, as though introducing himself were a task he completed several times a day and had long stopped finding meaningful. I am to escort you. Lovely, she said pleasantly. Will there be conversation? Or are we doing this in reverential silence? Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile. The memory of one, perhaps. The Alpha does not like to be kept waiting, he said. Then he should have sent a faster carriage, she replied. She took his hand, because refusing would have been pointless rather than brave, and stepped down. The courtyard did not react. But something shifted. Some subtle recalibration. A woman had arrived, yes, but not the woman they had expected. Good, Isa thought. Let them wonder. He came in from the side entrance, not the main doors, which meant he had been there before she arrived and simply chose that moment to make himself visible. Isa noted this. She noted everything. Draven Ashkar was not what the songs made of him. The songs described a monster, something vast and elemental and barely contained in human skin. And while she could see the truth in that, could feel it the way you feel a storm through a closed window, that was not what stopped the breath in her throat. What stopped it was this: he was tired. Not in the way of a man who needed sleep. Tired in the way of a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had forgotten, years ago, how to put it down. He crossed the hall without hurry. His gaze found her immediately and did not move. Gray eyes, the color of sky before lightning, carrying something she did not have a name for. He stopped 6 feet away. And then something extraordinary happened. He went very, very still. You are Isa of Goldveil, he said. Not a question. That depends on whether you intend to hold it against me, she replied. Silence settled between them, in which the fire popped and something moved behind his eyes. Your pact sent me a spy, he said. Your pact sent you a bride, she corrected pleasantly. Whether or not she watches everything and talks to the walls and has already identified which exits are unguarded, that is, I think, a matter of perspective. Behind her, Beta Orin made a sound that was probably meant to be a cough. Draven's gaze did not change, but something in his jaw did. You are not afraid of me, he observed. I did not say that, she said, and her voice was careful and even. I said my pact sent you a bride. I am choosing to be something more useful than afraid. More useful, he repeated, slow and deliberate, the way you repeat something that does not quite fit the category you had prepared for it. And what would that be? Unpredictable, she said. I find it tends to keep people alive longer. The silence stretched. Draven Ashkar, the Butcher of Duskholm, the alpha who had raised 3 packs and rebuilt an empire on their ash, looked at the woman his enemy had sent him as a consolation prize, and something passed across his face that no one in that hall could name, because they had never seen it on him before. He was interested. Chapter 3. They gave her a room that was too large and too cold, with a window that faced the mountain, and a door she noticed was not locked. She noticed because she had expected it to be. She could not sleep. It was not terror keeping her awake, though terror certainly had an apartment somewhere in her chest and was making considerable noise. It was something else, something that had started in that hall when she had looked up at him and had not stopped since. A pull, like a thread attached somewhere behind her ribs, taut and insistent, oriented in one direction with absolute confidence. His direction. No, she said aloud, to the ceiling, to the dark, to whatever ancient and inconvenient machinery in the universe thought this was a good idea. Absolutely not. Not him. Not now. Not like this. The ceiling had no opinion. The pull did not diminish. She found him on the outer wall. Or perhaps he found her. It was difficult to say, since she had simply followed the pull with the grim resignation of someone who has decided that ignoring a problem has not, in recent memory, made it smaller. He was standing at the parapet with his back to her, looking out at the mountain range, and she had the odd thought that he looked like a man who was arguing with the horizon and losing. He spoke before she made a sound. You should be asleep, he said without turning. You should probably be warmer, she replied, pulling her cloak closer and coming to stand a careful distance from him. How long have you known? He turned then. She watched something move across his face, something that looked almost painful in its honesty, the expression of a man who has spent years learning to be unreadable and has just, involuntarily, been read. The moment you stepped out of the carriage, he admitted. That long, she said quietly. And you said nothing. What would you have had me say? He asked.
I do not know, she said. Something.
Anything. She looked at him steadily. My name, perhaps, without the judgment attached to it.
He was quiet for a long time.
Below them, the shadow keep hummed in the way of old places that have absorbed too many histories to be truly silent. The mountain wind moved through the stone. Something howled, far away.
I did not ask for this, he said at last.
No, she agreed. Nor did I. She met his eyes without flinching, which she was quite proud of. But here we both are, apparently chosen by something considerably older and more powerful than either of us, which I personally find rude. For the second time since her arrival, something moved in his face that might, under different lighting, in a different century, have been the beginning of a smile. You are not what I expected, he said. No one ever is. When they bother to look, she replied. She turned back, toward the mountains. Tell me one true thing.
About you.
Not the legend. Not the reputation. You. The silence this time was different. Not cold. Complicated. I have not slept more than 3 hours together since I was 19 years old, he said. That is. She glanced at him sideways. That is genuinely terrible. What happened when you were 19? My father happened, he said, and something in his jaw set like iron cooling. And then I made sure he could not happen to anyone else. She did not press. Some doors you feel before you open them. The wise thing, always, is to give the person holding the handle time to decide. I will tell you one true thing about me, she said after a moment. I am far more frightened than I have let anyone see. And I am choosing, quite deliberately, not to be governed by it. Because being afraid and being cowed are not the same thing, and I will not give my fear that much authority over me. He looked at her. Really looked. The way you look at something when you have been cataloging it for survival, and suddenly realize you have been looking at it wrong all along. You are either very brave or very foolish, he said. My experience is that those two things are essentially the same, she said lightly, just in different lighting. He turned back to the mountains. But he did not leave.
Neither did she.
They stood in silence on the outer wall until the sky began, very gradually, to pale at its edges. Two people who were still strangers, who were already something else, watching the last of the dark recede. Chapter 4. The ceremony of the Shadow Pact was not like anything Isa had witnessed in Goldveil. No candles. No flowers. No songs about harvest and plenty and the gods smiling down on new unions. There was fire, great torches, iron brackets, the walls themselves orange with it. There were the pack elders in their bone-gray robes. There was the crowd of shadow wolves, hundreds of them, filling the great hall and the galleries above it, watching with those same measuring eyes. And there was Draven, standing at the center of the hall, still as a pillar, wearing no crown, no finery, no concession to ceremony beyond the deep gray of his ceremonial cloak. Watching the doors, watching for her. Isa walked in wearing her gray cloak because she had refused white and had refused her lady's attempts to convince her otherwise with the gentle but absolute finality of a woman who has decided exactly how she will enter a room for the rest of her life, and it is on her own terms. The hall did not murmur. It stared. She walked the full length of it without looking left or right, only at him. And he, in what would become in later years the single most discussed moment in the history of the Shadow Pact, took one step toward her. One step. Unprompted. Unordered. A step that was not in any version of the ceremony as it had ever been practiced. Just a step toward her. As if his feet had decided the remaining distance was not acceptable. This union is forged before the pack, before the mountain, before the blood that made us, the elder intoned, drawing the binding cord, black, for the Shadow Pact, threaded through with a single line of gold that was Goldveil's color, a detail that had been added to the ceremony on Draven's instruction and that no one had dared question. Speak your acceptance, or hold silence. The pack bears witness. Isa looked at Draven's hands as the cord was placed in them. Scarred hands. Warrior's hands. The hands of someone who had made hard choices and lived inside them. He was looking at her. Not at the elder. Not at the cord. Not at his pack. At her. Waiting. As if, and this was the thing that cracked something open in her chest for the second time, as if her answer genuinely mattered. As if he needed to hear it. I accept, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the hall was very still, and it carried. On one condition. The elder blinked. Beta Oren's eyes closed briefly, in the manner of a man contemplating a great many things, none of them peaceful. Half the pack forgot to breathe. Name it, Draven said. You will never lie to me, she replied. Not by word. Not by silence. Not by letting me believe something untrue because the correction was inconvenient. She held his gaze without wavering. I have had enough of convenient untruths to last several lifetimes. I will not carry more into this one. The silence in the hall was not empty. It was full of held breath and watching eyes and the weight of two people standing in the center of a great firelit room, measuring each other at the exact moment when measurement becomes something else entirely. Draven's thumb pressed once, briefly, against her wrist, above the cord, against her pulse. And then he said the one word she had not expected from him. The one word the entire Shadow Pack had probably never heard from him. Offered without condition. Without the shape of a man who was performing it. Agreed, he said. Chapter 5. The feast was 3 hours old when it happened. Isa had been seated at the high table, performing the considerable social labor of being pleasant to people who were clearly trying to decide what to make of her, when the smell reached her first. Iron and intent. She turned. The man came out of the serving corridor with a blade already drawn, moving fast through the crowd, his eyes fixed on her with a specific and terrible focus of someone who has been paid for a destination and arrived at it. Isa had time for exactly one thought, which was, of course. And then Draven was in front of her. She did not see him move. That was the impossible part. One moment he was at her side, and the next he was between her and the blade, and the sound of it, his hand catching the assassin's wrist, the crack of bone, the controlled and absolute brutality of it, was not the sound of a man protecting a political asset. It was the sound of something primal. Something that did not calculate. Something that simply would not allow what was behind it to be touched. Draven did not look at the assassin. He turned to Isa. She was standing very straight, which she had found in the past was the body's way of compensating when the knees were not entirely trustworthy. Are you hurt? He said. Not a question. The sentence too afraid of the answer to bother ending itself properly.
No.
She stopped. She looked at him with something shifting in her expression that was not quite composure, and not quite its absence. That was not protocol. That was not calculated diplomacy. You moved like... I know what I moved like, he said. You moved like a man whose mate was in danger, she said. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water.
His jaw tightened.
Isa, he began. Do not, she said, and it was not unkind. You told me you would not lie to me. Not by silence either. She held his gaze without giving him away around it. You knew before the ceremony. Before last night even. You knew the moment I arrived. A long breath. Then, and it cost him something. She could see it in the line of his shoulders, the way a man looks when he has been carrying armor for so long that taking it off is its own kind of pain. He said it. Yes, he admitted. Why did you say nothing? She asked. Because you have been handed to me against your will, he said, and the words were measured and deliberate, as though he had thought about this in the dark hours and chosen each one carefully. I did not want you to accept the bond, because it existed. I wanted, he stopped. What did you want? She asked, quieter now. I wanted you to choose it, he said. If you chose it at all. The great hall held its breath. 500 shadow wolves, the most feared pack on the continent, watching their alpha, the man who had never in recorded history been uncertain about anything, standing in the ruins of his own careful plan, waiting. Isa looked at him, at the tired gray eyes and the scarred hands and the immense, exhausting weight of a man who had been a monster for so long he had genuinely stopped expecting something different. And she reached out and put her hand against his chest, over his heart, which was, she could feel, beating considerably faster than any fearsome butcher of legend would want witnessed. You stopped a blade for me before you ever acknowledged what you were to me, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the hall was so still it filled every corner of it. You moved before you chose to. You could not help yourself. She held his gaze. That is not a man performing an obligation, Draven. That is a mate. What happened next was told in the Shadow Pack for generations. Beta Orin dropped to one knee first. Because Beta Orin, it turned out, had been waiting for this exact moment for approximately 3 years and was not going to miss it. The pack followed. Not for Draven. They had always knelt for Draven. For her. For the woman from a dying pack in a gray cloak who had walked into the most feared hall on the continent with nothing but a hunting knife and a refusal to be managed. Who had looked their alpha in the eye and made him keep his word before she agreed to stand beside him. Who had put her hand over his heart and named him for what he was, in front of everyone, without cruelty and without theater. Just truth. Simply delivered. Draven looked at his pack, then at her. You have made a considerable impression on 500 of the most difficult people on this continent, he said. Only 500, she replied, glancing out at the hall. I must be losing my touch. He made a sound. The Shadow Pack, in 40 years of living memory, had never heard it before. Their alpha was laughing.
Softly.
Briefly. But it was there.
Real.
Later, when the feast had resumed, when the assassin had been dealt with and traced back to Isa's father's most terrified advisor, and several quiet conversations had been had about that particular man's future, Draven and Isa stood again on the outer wall. The mountain was dark. The stars were sharp and close, the way they only are at altitude, the way they look when there is no pretension left in the air. The pull between them had not subsided. Isa suspected it would not. She was, cautiously, choosing to regard this as a feature rather than a flaw.
What do you need? He said.
Of this place.
Of me.
Tell me plainly, and I will answer plainly. Time, she said, considering. And honesty. And, eventually, something that might generously be called trust, though I recognize we are building from a foundation of enforced marriage and political sacrifice, so perhaps we start with the honesty and work upward. I can give you all of those things, he said. I know, she replied. She said it simply, without performance, and that simplicity was the most generous thing she could have offered him. That is the first thing that has surprised me today. He turned to look at her. That you meant it, she said, answering the question he had not asked. Most people who say things like that are building a sentence, not a promise. But you, she tilted her head. You are a man who means what he says. You just say very little. There has never been anyone worth saying most things to, he said. The silence after that was, for the first time since her arrival, not something she needed to fill.
She let it be.
They were fated, yes. The thread between them was ancient and absolute, and did not particularly care about the circumstances of its own discovery. But fate is a beginning, not an ending. What comes after, the knowing, the choosing, the daily and deliberate decision to keep turning toward each other, that is built, not given. Isa of Goldveil, bride of the Shadow Alpha, stood on the outer wall of the most feared keep in the known realm and understood with perfect clarity that she was not here as a sacrifice. She was here as a reckoning, his, and in the quiet, honest, terrifying way of things that are real rather than convenient, her own. And that is where we leave them, not with a perfect ending but with a beginning that was earned. Isa did not arrive as a victim. She arrived as a force. And Draven did not receive a sacrifice. He received the one person the universe had decided, in its ancient and inconvenient wisdom, was capable of handling him. If you want to see where this story goes, the politics, the betrayal from Goldveil, the full revelation of what Draven's father truly was, and the moment this bond is tested in a way neither of them is ready for, let me know in the comments. Like the video. Subscribe if you are new here. And I will see you in the next one.